What's going on? This Theo Gremminger, aka the OG Fantasy, back at it. Week 13 sleepers. We're almost at the end of the line here. 2 more weeks of the fantasy regular season in most leagues. Some leagues are already in their fantasy playoffs. You play FFPC, you're in the fantasy playoffs this week. So this is the nitty gritty. This is the real time. We don't have a whole lot of time left this season, and we have to make impactful moves to shape our rosters. And this week, fantasy sleepers was like the hardest sleepers column I've had to write all season long. And doing this video is not exactly fun either. And the main reason for that is we have 6 teams on bye weeks. So the player pool for me has shrunk down significantly this week. I have a lot less players to choose from than I did like last week during Thanksgiving week. But just to give you the roundup, Baltimore, Buffalo, Chicago Bears, Las Vegas Raiders, Minnesota Vikings, New York Giants, all on bye weeks this week. And then just to keep an eye out, next week, Arizona and Washington on a bye. So next week is a lot more manageable. But, hopefully you've enjoyed this column all season long and these videos all season long. I know that Sleepers has been a well-received article and well-received video, and I appreciate the kind words on these. But like we've had a bunch of hits. Like this has been fun. Like we had Devin Singletary, Ty Chandler, Noah Brown, the big week Noah Brown had, Keaton Mitchell, Josh Downs before he broke out, begging you to put him on your team. Jaden Reed, a couple weeks, and now he's on everybody's roster. Kate Otten, Demario Douglas. So some of you use this video and column as like a waivers of the future article, like a waivers of the future video where it's maybe a guy that you can stash before the weekend that might be a waiver wire ad next week. And I think we got a couple of guys like that today. Some of you use this video to find like that emergency starter. There's less of those guys this week. So, we got to kind of brace ourselves a little bit. But the reason I have so few players to choose from is not only the 6 teams on bye, but the threshold we give you at Player Profiler. Like there's a lot of quality content out there on other sites. I'll give those guys their props. I think we're turning out some tremendous content at Player Profiler, but I look at some other sleepers driven articles and videos, and they're looking at sort of different guys than I am. So to me, a sleeper is somebody that you watch this video and you have open free agents in your league. You can turn off this video, and the guys I'm talking about, a bunch of them are going to be available to you like right away. And then if you're in a league that has closed waivers where you have like 2 waiver wire runs, most of the guys I'm talking about today are going to be available to you in that secondary waiver wire run. I know that a couple of these guys are available to me still, so I'm sure that some of them are going to be available to you. Now, whether you want to add some of these guys, that's going to kind of be on you, because again, there's some names this week that usually would not make the cut. But again, we're looking at guys who are available in 75% or more of Yahoo leagues. And we're going to go ahead and start out at the quarterback position. And this is a guy that a few weeks back, I don't think I would have considered using, and especially would not have considered like featuring off the top here. And that's Kenny Pickett. So Pittsburgh fires Matt Canada. And I think fantasy managers, a lot of them wanted him gone for a long, long time now. We finally get the change at offensive coordinator. There was a lot of like apprehension with the Rooneys. Mike Tomlin was upset about it, but I think Pittsburgh saw the writing on the wall and knew that they had to make a change at the offensive coordinator position. And immediately in the first game where Eddie Faulkner took over as offensive coordinator, we saw Kenny Pickett have his highest passing yardage of the entire season. And they were doing it in different ways where Kenny Pickett was attacking the middle of the field. We saw Pat Freiermuth put up like huge numbers, his best performance all season by a mile. And certainly if you picked up Pat Freiermuth where he was available in some leagues, That was a guy we talked about on the waiver wire video a few weeks back. I was able to pick him up in an NFFC league, and now he's looking like a guy where I picked him up to be tight end depth to Dalton Kincaid. Now Freiermuth is looking like a guy where I could potentially just flex him and start 2 tight ends and have that option because Muth was just eating over the middle of the field, and that's the way that Pittsburgh seemed to really, really have great success. And that's something we rarely saw with the Matt Canada-led offense. So Kenny Pickett passed for 278 yards in Week 12's win over Cincy. Now he goes up against Arizona, who's allowed the 4th most passing touchdowns in the league this season. And this is a statistic where Pickett really, really struggles. He only has 6 touchdown passes this season, but we like the way that Pat Freiermuth looks. You have Deontay Johnson, you have George Pickens, guys where we like the talent. The production has not always been there. And then you think back to the Rams game against Arizona last week where Matt Stafford passed for 4 touchdown passes, and it was on less than 230 passing yards. So this Cardinals defense can be beat. And you also think about the success that Kyren Williams had as a receiver, catching 2 touchdown passes. And we know that Jaylen Warren can do that out of the backfield. So Kenny Pickett, I have to use Kenny Pickett on a team this week. And I'm not excited about it, but I certainly feel better about it than I did, a couple of weeks back where I would have been sick to my stomach heading into the game with Kenny Pickett behind center. So Kenny Pickett, he's here. He was in my waiver wire video a couple days ago in my waiver wire column. Now he's in my sleepers column. It's a new world out there, guys. I got to talk about Kenny Pickett. Who would have thought? Another quarterback that I didn't think I would be speaking about too often would be Bryce Young. And it's sort of like people are going to kind of roll their eyes at this one. It's the law of self-preservation and the law of opportunities. You rarely get opportunities as a signal caller to call an NFL offense. Your sample size can be very small, and you want to make a mark with it for future employment. And you have Thomas Brown is going to be calling the plays in Carolina. Frank Reich was fired. Deuce Staley, the running backs coach, was fired. Now you have Thomas Brown calling plays, and this is an opportunity for him to push the envelope and get a lot more aggressive. And it's a really good matchup for Bryce Young in week 1. It's sort of like a what do they have to lose type mentality where Bryce Young gets a new signal caller who I expect to be a little bit more aggressive. I mean, we all think back to the end of the game play against Tennessee where they had 4th and 6, 4th and 7, and they call a screen pass and they basically get stuffed behind the line of scrimmage as the way they end the game. It was about as bad of a play call as you're ever going to see. I expect them to be a lot more aggressive, and they go up against a Tampa Bay secondary that has allowed the 3rd most passing yards all season long. So looking at Bryce Young, looking at Kenny Pickett, and then I got to go back to my guy, Gardner Minshew. I talk about him all the time. I'm a sucker for Gardner Minshew. I'm a sucker for Minshew Magic. And it's kind of a weird one because I wouldn't be talking about him again if we didn't have so many teams on bye. He's been not doing really anything fantasy-wise, but he's coming off of a 251 passing yard performance against that same Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary that I'm looking at Bryce Young to potentially have a big game against, or a solid game against. Let me walk that one back. But Minshew has a chance to build on that 251 passing yard performance in a must-win road game against Tennessee. Colts basically got to win out. They got to win a number of these games to get to the playoffs in the AFC. They're very much in the mix, but they need to win games like this against Tennessee. The Titans are a very difficult team to run on, but they can be passed on. So Indy might be looking to be a little bit more pass heavy this week. And then you also get the fact that Jonathan Taylor is not playing. He has thumb surgery. If you have Zach Moss, you got to be really, really excited. If you have Jonathan Taylor, you got to be feeling a little sick because I don't know what's going to happen with Jonathan Taylor here, where I don't know if Jonathan Taylor will be back. I think it's going to be dependent on whether the Colts keep winning or not. So that's a whole nother story. But they got to win this game against Tennessee. I think they're going to attack him with the pass. Zach Moss has been solid out of the backfield as a pass catcher in his starts this season. You have Michael Pittman. You have Josh Downs. I think that they're going to have to get a little bit more out of Minshew as a passer. It's just a hunch. And again, this is more of a super flex recommendation. The other two guys, they're a little more interesting to me in terms of long-term stashes because I think there's a little bit of unknown upside for both of them with these new signal callers. Got to pivot over here to the running back position. Again, some really tough names on this one. If I was willing to go up to like 50% rostered, I'd have a lot more guys to talk about here, but I really wouldn't be helping you out. I'd say the number one guy on this list that I think is a must stash player right now, a must stash player for the rest of the season. One of the handcuffs that I want to have a high amount of exposure to, and that's D'Ernest Johnson. Last week, we saw Travis Etienne briefly leave the game with a chest injury, only to come back. And just think to yourself in a mental exercise, how much fab would D'Ernest Johnson have gone for this week if Travis Etienne was like lost to something major? So D'Ernest Johnson is right here in the mix as the backup running back, the handcuff in Jacksonville. And he's seen increased playing time. He's had 17 touches in his past 2 games. He's shown ability as a receiver, and he's cut into Travis Etienne in the snap share. Now, I think that the snap share losses for Etienne were really because it's a preservation thing. They want to keep him fresh heading into the into the NFL playoffs. But to me, this is a good enough offense where D'Ernest Johnson needs to be rostered in like way more leagues than he's rostered in now. Again, he is available in 87% of Yahoo leagues. I think he's a must-stash. Royce Freeman. Freeman is also available in 87% of Yahoo leagues. This is more of a handcuff, but Freeman's kind of looked like a handcuff plus lately. Kyron Williams has his ridiculous game last week, goes over 200 combined yards, and Royce Freeman still gives you 70 plus yards and a touchdown. It's the second consecutive game that Freeman has had 70 yards rushing. So I think he's done enough that he's going to get some touches, and he's shown, some strong ability. Royce Freeman, I think early in his career was a huge disappointment, and he's certainly been nothing but a journeyman ever since, but he's had a really nice run here with Los Angeles in terms of giving them contributions with his rushing performance. He had a touchdown run last week against Arizona as well. It was a 23-yard run, and he found the end zone. The last couple of running backs here, just a little bit different. Michael Carter, who, if you're kind of going by ranking these guys, D'Ernest Johnson would be one. And then if I'm looking for a long-term stash for the rest of the season, I'd have Michael Carter 2. If I'm looking for a guy and I'm in like an emergency start and I need to play one of them this weekend, it would be Royce Freeman as 2 and Carter as 3. But Carter I like a lot. He's available in 97% of Yahoo leagues. And it was like a very quiet debut game, but he played 38% of the snaps. It was like James Conner only played like 40-something% of the snaps, and Amari DiMercato played like 20% of them. But Michael Carter played 38% of the snaps. He caught all 4 of his targets, and he had more combined yards than James Conner. So Carter has had 96 career catches, and it seems like Arizona wants to get a long look at what he brings to the table. So if they're going to use him as a receiver out of the backfield like this, and he's going to get a near 40% target snap share, then I think he's very interesting. And if James Conner goes down, it would be Michael Carter and not Amari DiMercato as the back you'd want in Arizona. And we got to remember, like Michael Carter here just arrived there. DiMercato has been there since the preseason. So this is a really kind of a statement. And then you factor in the fact that Arizona has multiple pass catchers that are banged up right now. Carter could be a sneaky play this week in that game against Pittsburgh. Now, one guy to stash and not throw in your lineup is Patrick Taylor. Aaron Jones is going to miss another game, and Taylor's going to have another opportunity to be the number 2 back in Green Bay behind A.J. Dillon. And what's funny is Patrick Taylor played a huge amount of snaps, but A.J. Dillon got all the touches. So Taylor only had 4 touches in Green Bay's win over Detroit on Thanksgiving. But he's definitely looking like the handcuff, at least until Aaron Jones comes back. And it looks like Green Bay has enough confidence in Taylor to get him on the field for a pretty high percentage of snaps. So again, I would be more excited about getting Dearness Johnson or Michael Carter. But if something happened to A.J. Dillon this week, Taylor would become a big fab addition. So we're looking at all sorts of handcuffs at this point. When we get to the wide receiver spot, I got a lot of guys this week. Usually when I'm doing this video, I have a bunch of these guys that are kind of pushing the 25% rostered number. But this week it happened to be a bunch of guys that are basically free. And the first one is Greg Dortch. Trey McBride and Hollywood Brown both missed practice time this week. They're banged up. Michael Wilson is out with another game. He's got a knee injury. Enter Greg Dortch. Dortch has kind of come out of nowhere, and he's been targeted 17 times over the past 2 weeks. He had 52 catches last season, and he's got a connection with Kyler Murray. Like, if you're in a complete jam and you say, I need 10 points out of a guy this week, I think Greg Dortch is going to give that to you. I don't think his ceiling is particularly high, but I do think he's got a floor, and it's a game that I expect Arizona to be trailing. Rondell Moore has seen way less targets than Greg Dortch has. So Dortch is back. He had like waiver wire appeal last year for a few weeks, and he's back at it this year. Greg Dortch and Kyler Murray have a connection. I don't think we should ignore that. 17 targets in 2 games is significant, and we need to pay attention to that. And that's kind of a lesson for this time of year is look at the usage. When these guys kind of come out of nowhere and start getting usage, we don't want to ignore that at all. It's significant. And there's always a few guys in the fantasy playoffs that are like kind of out of nowhere. I remember a few years back, it was Braxton Berrios for the New York Jets. And in championship week, he had this massive opportunity. And a couple of people were bold enough to put him in their lineup. And he, caught like 8 passes and got a touchdown. And Braxton Berrios. It happens every year if you go back through the week 17 box score, last year, and then you go way back where it was like the week 16 was the last week of fantasy. Take a look at those box scores for the final weeks, and there's some very interesting guys who put up big performances. So don't overlook a guy like Greg Dortch when he starts to see consistent targets. Let's talk about A.T. Perry, rookie wide receiver, New Orleans Saints. Chris Olave looks like he's going to miss with concussion syndrome, symptoms. And Rashid Shaheed is dealing with a quad injury. So if those guys miss, A.T. Perry would be interesting this week. They're playing the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions just allowed 3 passing touchdowns to Green Bay last week. And A.T. Perry actually led New Orleans in wide receiver snaps last week. So he had almost no fantasy stats to show for it. But this week against Detroit, we got to be honest, like that Detroit offense is going to put a lot of pressure on this New Orleans offense to keep up with them. Detroit is kind of a machine. I would expect Detroit especially to bounce back with a long week to prep for this game. So I think Detroit's going to put pressure on New Orleans. You could get game flow where Derek Carr is going to have to take some shots and A.T. Perry's going to be on the field the entire time. Got to be very bold to use him, but he might be somebody you want to stash because he could be ascending a little bit. We don't know what this quad injury, if it's something that's going to continue to linger with Rashid Shaheed. And we like that New Orleans schedule throughout the fantasy playoffs. So keep an eye on A.T. Perry, stash him. If you're in complete desperation, fortune favors the bold. Jonathan Mingo. Mingo is available in 94% of Yahoo leagues. 2nd round pick, Jonathan Mingo. So see Bryce Young and double down with Mingo. Mingo's had at least 4 targets in 5 straight games, and he's drawn 19 targets in his last 3 games. He had 60 receiving yards in week 12, and he has a chance for even more against that Tampa Bay secondary. The Mingo and Young connection, if it was going to show signs of life for the rest of the season, it would be a positive step in the right direction for Carolina heading into the offseason. Talk about Marvin Mims. Mims has been praised by Sean Payton and Russell Wilson like a lot lately. Both of them have signaled Marvin Mims. And, let's be honest, we haven't seen a whole lot out of Jerry Jeudy at all. So I think there's room for Mims to kind of take more and more work as the season goes along. I've had my heart broken by the Mims usage this season. This was a guy who we had way, way high in the waiver wire column early in the season when he had like big, big plays that he displayed. And then he had costly fumble against the Jets and got like buried. So it seems like he's slowly and surely worked his way back in. Again, this is a second round player, and I don't think anyone questions Marvin Mims' talent. We just need for him to get an opportunity and targets, and I think he'd produce as a fantasy player. Jalen Guyton, 95% of Yahoo leagues, Guyton is available. It's a mess in LA right now. Quentin Johnson's banged up and he's unreliable. Keenan Allen, who's been wide receiver 2 overall this season and crushing it. Keenan Allen's like absolutely crushing it, and he's banged up. I expect Keenan Allen's going to play, but he's definitely banged up, missing some practice time. And both of those guys are there. And then I had hope for Josh Palmer, who Josh Palmer was due to come off of IR. And I actually included Josh Palmer pretty high up in the waiver wire video and article this week. But Josh Palmer, the way that they're wording it with Josh Palmer is it sounds like more of a hope that Josh Palmer plays this season again, rather than a he's absolutely going to be back soon. So Jalen Guyton has an opportunity. I think that the New England Patriots are going to do everything they can to try to take away Keenan Allen. This is a defense for better or for worse, does things scheme-wise that is still strong. You think of the Giants game was one of the worst games you've ever seen. But New England found ways to limit Saquon Barkley, and it ended up being like Jalen Hyatt having a really big game against them. So talk about Jalen Hyatt's skill set. Jalen Guyton is somewhat similar. They're both speed wide receivers, and I think that this could be a sneaky Guyton game. So I'd actually probably rather play Jalen Guyton this week than have to go with like an unproven A.T. Perry. But I know that Billy Muzio on First Class Fantasy, he liked Perry a little bit more than I did. So Billy's a sharp guy. I'm willing to admit I can be wrong once in a while, like we all can. And I don't know. Something about Jalen Guyton this week doesn't really scare me off of him. Gerald Everett would have made this video, but he's rostered in 38% of Yahoo leagues. So if Gerald Everett's available in your league, go take a look. He might be a sneaky beneficiary as well with all these guys kind of banged up in LA. Sticking with the tight end spot here, my favorite tight end addition this week is Juwan Johnson. I really like Juwan Johnson this week. I talked about him at length in the waiver wire video and article. This was New Orleans' first game coming off of a bye week. And if you've watched any of my videos or read my articles or listened to my podcasts, I put a great deal of weight into what NFL teams do coming off of a bye week. I think it's very telling because it gives teams a chance to really scout their next opponent. So sometimes it can be matchup specific, but it also gives teams a chance to self-scout and say, which players can I utilize more and which players should I be utilizing less? Which things schematically should we be changing? And it was very positive signs for Juwan Johnson coming out of the bye, if you take it in that context. He had 7 targets, and he caught 4 passes for 45 yards. Talk about Juwan Johnson last year was the kind of guy where he was having fantasy success catching touchdowns. Now he comes out of the bye week here, and he gets 7 targets. There was a lot of beat reporters in New Orleans in the preseason talking about the connection between Johnson and Carr. Johnson had a little bit of buzz this preseason. He's dealt with injuries, and there really hasn't been anything there, but I think he could end the season well. He goes up against that Detroit defense that, again, allowed 3 touchdown catches to the in their game against the Packers, and Tucker Kraft, who probably could have been in this video, Tucker Kraft, but he didn't make it. Tucker Kraft, he scored a touchdown. So Juwan Johnson is one of my favorite players on this video. I really like him as a stash. See if he's available in your league. He is available in 82% of Yahoo leagues. And the last tight end to talk about, this is an injury fill-in. Hopefully this is a short injury fill-in because Dalton Schultz has played so well this season, but it's Brevin Jordan. Brevin Jordan is available in, you guessed it, 100% of Yahoo leagues. But I think he's going to see a huge snap share with Dalton Schultz missing this week's game. And CJ Stroud has had very strong success targeting the tight end position this year. Dalton Schultz has had 61 targets and he's caught 5 touchdown passes. That's a very, high percentage there for that few targets. So I think that Brevin Jordan, if you're like throwing a dart out there and you need a tight end to catch a touchdown and you're in a very, very deep format, I think Brevin Jordan is interesting. Again, my name is Theo Gremminger. Smash the like button, hit the subscribe button. It really helps us to put videos like this out for you. Check out my podcast this week, First Class Fantasy with Billy Muzio. Press coverage, I had Jim Coventry of RotoWire on, and that was earlier in the week, but it was basically a preview for this week and some rest of the season fantasy playoff prep. You can find that right here on Player Profiler YouTube. Both of those shows I'm putting out every single week. And then the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast, I record that with Matt Kelly, the Podfather, and Alan Sislowski. We record that about once a month right now. It's going to pump up a lot in the offseason when we become more Dynasty focused. And then Dynasty Life, my new Dynasty podcast, I recorded that today with Scott Connor, who's really one of the best out there in the Dynasty game from Destination Devy and Dynasty Trades in 5. Look for my waivers video to drop every single week early in the week. And then I'm dropping a few other videos here and there that can help you out. You find them right here on Player Profiler YouTube. It's time to crush it. It's week 13. Let's get some wins. Let's win a couple of these leagues. We put in the work. You're watching videos like this. You're living the grind. You're getting after it. Let's ship some titles. Let's finish the season well. Let's win some money. And let's have a really, really strong finish. Have a great week.